Oh, hey, you know, it's been quite some time since I had a chance to revisit the Commodore Plus 4 User's Manual. In previous videos, I've covered chapters 1 and 2, but you know, it took a long time to get to chapter 3, which is using software. And in this chapter, we are going to cover built-in software, cartridges, cassettes, and diskettes. The problem was, with my Plus 4, I didn't have a working data set or necessarily a working Commodore 1541 disk drive. So what I chose to do was, as I've been doing, is see if there's some modern replacements for those older devices. And in the meantime, I have put together a Commodore or a Pi 1541 using a Raspberry Pi Zero. There is a video for that. I'll put a link in the video description below. I also created a Tapwino, which is over here. I'm not going to hold it up because it's a little fragile. But if you want to see my Tapwino experience, I call it Project Tapwino. Also check the link below for a link to that video. And that was a lot of fun to put together. But you know, it's interesting because we used a Raspberry Pi and an Arduino, two of my favorite things, to replace a data set and a 1541. To place another modern spin on this, I do have a cartridge. A cartridge is a part of chapter 3, and this cartridge is the Diag 264 from The Future Was 8-Bit. So here's a modern cartridge. We're going to throw in our old 80s Commodore computer. So let's dive into chapter 3, where we learn how to use cartridges, cassettes, really high-tech there, and floppy disk drives. Okay, so the first thing we want to do before we use software is we actually need to hook up some hardware. And so I've got the Plus 4 here. Plus 4 is actually turned on right now. You can see that here with the little red light. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off, because what we want to do now is we want to connect the Pi 1541 and the Tapwino. I want to do that first. So let's go ahead and get those devices out in our cables. First thing that we need is, we'll start with our Pi 1541. You can tell right now I've already started work on a case, and I've kind of spoiled or alluded that I've got a case project coming, and this is the beginning of it. And you'll see I have this little 3D printed case with these little built-in buttons that are part of the case. That's coming soon, so be on the lookout for that. But the Pi 1541 uses the IEC cables, and it's powered by USB. So you do have to power it by USB. So I do have a USB cable back here that we can connect. So first of all, let's grab our IEC cable, which is this one right here. Now the great thing about the Pi 1541 is when you plug in an IEC cable, you have a pass-through. So if you want to connect another Pi 1541, or actually a real 1541 or a 1581 or a 1571 or whatever those disk drives are you want to plug in, you can still do that. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this into this port here. Then we'll find the IEC port on the back, which we'll find over here listed as serial right there. So we will plug that device in there. And the next thing we will do is we will apply, and it's going to get a little crowded back here with cables, that's for sure, but the next thing we're going to do is apply power. And I already have this power adapter plugged in to the USB port on an outlet over here. So let's go ahead and plug this in. Make sure I get that right. Oh, actually, I have absolutely the wrong cable. Of course that would happen. So let me grab the right cable. Okay, I had a mini USB instead of a micro USB, so now we have that. Let's go ahead and plug that into my power strip back here. Okay, let's go ahead and plug this in. And you'll notice we'll get a little blip right here that says it's on, but you have to turn on the Plus 4 in order for it to become active, and then you'll see that here. So I'm going to go ahead and set this aside, but we're going to turn off the computer again, because now what we're going to do is we're going to plug in the Tapwino. So the Tapwino project was a lot more complicated. You can check out the video in the, there's a link to the video in the video description or below for this video, but you can see this is just basically breadboarded. So it's an Arduino. It does have a LCD screen, so we can see which tape files or .tap files we're using. It also has an SD card reader. You can see that here. SD card is already formatted, everything's put in. But as soon as we plug it in, it should boot right up and act like we have a data set connected to our Plus 4. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this in to the data set port. You'll notice the data set is different on the +4 than it was on a Commodore 64 or a VIC-20. That had a wider connector, and you can check out my Tapwino project video to learn more about that. Now, what I'm going to do is bring the Tapwino up here, trying to be very careful because these pin connectors are very fragile. I could easily break one of those off if I'm not careful. And let's go ahead and turn this on. Now, the Tapwino, unlike the Pi 1541, gets its power from the data cassette port of the +4. Initializing version 2.8, and we're ready to go. So now we have both our Pi 1541 and our Tapwino connected. So now we have simulated an old data set and an old diskette drive, and we can start to load software. Hey, before we dive into the next chapter, chapter 3, I want to remind you to hit that subscribe button below and that alert button. Also, be sure and leave your comments. Viewers are leaving comments that are making these videos much better. And then I also want to remind you, there is always a companion blog post with each one of these videos. The companion blog post will include my notes for the video, as well as additional tips, all the links that you need, and there's always a link to show you where there's more information for the topics covered or about the entire +4 series. So again, make sure that you are participating and becoming a part of the project to make this even better. Okay, let's dig into chapter 3. And chapter 3 again is about software and using software. And the very first thing that's covered in the user's manual in chapter 3 is using the built-in software. So let's describe how we load the built-in software. Now, first of all, built-in software is a whole nother manual itself. We'll see at the end with the user's manual if I want to cover that. I have been playing with the built-in software. I'm actually pretty impressed with what it could do. It does have some quirks. It obviously is dated, but it was a pretty robust little package. We're not going to cover that, but we do want to start in going through our chapter and talking about how we can load that built-in software. So let me go ahead and bring up our monitor here. Now the computer is currently turned off. The first thing that you need to do to load the built-in software is turn the computer on. And now we have the Commodore +4 with Commodore Basic 3.5, but you'll also see that right at the very top it says the 3+1 is on key F1. So if we hit F1, then we get this command, which is the sys 1525:3-plus-1. Now, if you were to type that in, that would also load the built-in software, but obviously hitting F1 is easy, and then we hit return. And now you will notice that we are in the built-in word processor. Again, we're not going to cover anything else right now. We may come back to this later, and it would be much later looking at the built-in software, but that's how you get it to the built-in software. So that's the first part of chapter 1. So chapter 3 is actually quite short. If we look through here, it's not many pages, but there's a lot of content on these pages. It spends a lot of time talking about the hardware, and that's where we're headed next. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to load software from a cartridge. Now, if you've ever done anything with an Atari 2600 or any retro computer, I know you know how to do this, but we're going to go through the process anyway because it's in the user's manual. So let me go ahead and go to a screen that will give you a bigger view of our computer. And what we're going to do, the very first thing that we need to do before ever inserting a cartridge, and this is extremely important, as a matter of fact, it's important for any hardware that you connect to your +4, is make sure you turn the power off. And if you remember, we had the power on because we just loaded the built-in software, so we'll go ahead and turn that off on the side. The cartridge is a different size and a different form factor than what you would find on a Commodore 64 VIC-20. But we'll go ahead and pull this thing up. There is a cartridge port right here. You can see that, and you'll see it kind of fits really nicely in there. So we'll go ahead and push that in there until we get a nice kind of thud. There we go, and that feels like it's in there nicely. Now this cartridge, the Diag 264, is a diagnostic cartridge designed to test things like video and memory and other parts of your +4. I decided I really needed that, and I really appreciate that the Future Was 8-Bit had that available. I don't have any issues with this +4, but I did want the diagnostic cartridge, and I really didn't want to buy another cartridge because +4 cartridges, first, are hard to find. Most of them come from Europe, so there's going to be a lot of shipping on top of that. And what I'm going to do now is turn it on, and we'll see if the cartridge loads. And you'll see it's running through some tests, a couple of video tests, checking the high memory, and so the cartridge is working. Okay, so as you can see, it was running through some tests. Now what I'm going to do, you never want to just pull the cartridge out. That would be a bad thing. To reboot, you can, if we hit the reset, what's going to happen is it's just going to reset the +4. So what we want to do is shut off. There we go. There's the sound test. It's checking the sound processor that's in the +4. Okay, let's go ahead and remove the cartridge. Now remember, to do that, you don't want to just pull it out. You want to turn the power off. Then what you want to do is go back and pull the cartridge out. And that's it. Okay, the next thing that we're going to talk about is using the data set. Let me show you what a data set looked like. This is what a data set looked like. And what you would do is you would eject that. You would take a cassette like this. This is Way of the Exploding Fist for the Commodore 16 or +4. Little known fact, I ordered this thinking I could try this out, but this is the PAL version. This is an NTSC +4, so this will not work with this. It wasn't that much, but I'm glad to have it for this demonstration because, believe it or not, I don't have a cassette laying around the house anywhere. So what you would do is you would take this cassette, you would place it into the data set, you would close it, you would set it aside, you would issue some commands, and if you were going to load the software, then what you would do is you would hit the play button here. It would go, the bits would go through the cable through here, and basically what it's doing is it's playing an audio file that's a series of bips and tones, and those tones would move through the cable into the computer, and the computer would convert that to binary. These were so fragile though, I remember losing a lot of software as well. So what I've done is I have created, since I don't have a data set that works with this device, I could have created an adapter from the C2N cable for that data set to the 7-pin DIN that's in here. But what I did is I wanted to take that a step further, and as I showed you at the very beginning, I built from some great resources online, the Tapwino. So this is the Tapwino, and I'm going to move this down so you can see the screen. And what it does is it simulates a data set, and you do that through moving tap files onto this little SD card. So we've already talked about it. When we turn it on, it's going to provide power. So what we're going to do now is we're going to run through the Chapter 3 commands for using a data set, but we're going to use the Tapwino. Again, if you want to see my video on building the Tapwino and some of the tips along the way, there's a link in the video description. There's also a great companion blog post that shows you where you can source all the components and build this yourself. I will tell you I have another plan as well. I plan to consolidate all of this onto a smaller board and create a 3D printed case. That's going to come much later. That'll probably be more towards the end of the year or first of next year, because right now it's working and I want to keep it working, but eventually I want to get that done. So let's go ahead and work through the next portion of Chapter 3, which is cassettes. And first thing we want to do is we want to load cassette tapes. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to load some software from the Tapwino. So first of all, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the computer, and I want you to see this before we go over to the computer side. And you'll see we're initializing, we wait for that to initialize, and then you can see we are in play mode. Now I'm going to be bouncing around through play and record mode. Right now for loading software, we want it to be in play mode. So that's perfect. Let's go back to our screen. Let's go ahead and see what the command is to load software. So all we do is we type load, we hit enter, and now I'm going to go back here to my, you see it was asking me to press play. Now I can't press play, I am in play mode, so that's good, but what I want to do now is I want to cycle through and I want to pick which software I want to load. So let's go ahead and scroll down, let's go to games. Let's do Icicle Works. And now it says it's loading, so let's go back here. And you'll see that the screen blanked, and that lets us know it is loading the software from the Tapwino. So let me go back to the Tapwino view, and let's just wait. So I've been waiting for about a minute. I did speed up the video quite a bit right there, but This mimics exactly the loading time that it would take for a real data set. So it takes a long time. So we're just going to continue to watch. We're about halfway there, but just think if this were expanded out in real time, how long this takes for this particular software to load. It's game software, so it is going to be quite a big loading time. When we do something a little bit smaller with our own code, as you'll see here in a minute, you'll see it's a little bit faster. And you'll see that some software will present a loading screen, just like Icicle works, which this is evidently a Commodore title, and it's copyright 1985, Commodore Business Machines, UK. And there we go. So now we have Icicle Works loaded from our Tapwino or our virtual data set. So that's how you load software. Okay, let's go ahead and reset the machine. Whenever I reset, I'm just going to hit the reset button on the side, and that's going to bring us back to the very beginning. Now that completely wiped out that entire program. It is gone. If I do a list, there is nothing there. So we're starting over. So now the next thing that we want to talk about is saving programs. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and create a quick program. And this is the standard RetroCombs program that we've been using. Let's go ahead and list that, and you'll see that's in there. Now what we want to do, let's go ahead and run it, make sure everything works. It does. We'll hit run stop. We'll do that. We will go ahead and do a clear screen, which is a Shift F1 on the +4. And now what we want to do is we want to load that software or save that software onto our cassette, or in this case our Tapwino. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit save. Now, one of the things that you can do with most Commodore commands is hit the first character of the command and then a shift the second character. So in this case, a Shift A. So I can hit that and then say save. And I'm going to call this RetroCombs, and we're going to close the quotation. So we're going to put that in quotations. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to configure the Tapwino to be in record mode. And normally what you would do on a data set is you would press play and record, or play and record at the same time, and then you would send the software from the +4 over to the data set. But we need to configure the Tapwino to do that. So what I'm going to do is scroll down to record mode. I'm going to hit enter. Now I can use a manual mode to name my tap file, which is the file that's created on the SD card that contains our program, or I can use automatic. I like automatic, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to go ahead and hit enter. And now it's ready to start. So it really wants us to press start on the +4. So let's go back over to the +4. And now let's go ahead and save the software. So we're going to hit S, Shift A, and let's call it RetroCombs. Now, because we have the Tapwino set in record mode, we can now press enter on our +4 to send it over. So let's see what happens. As you see, it says press play and record on tape. So let's go back here. And so what I'm going to do now is hit this key right here to press start. As you'll see now, it is recording that tap file. Let's go back to the screen here. You'll see we're blank, showing that something is happening. Something is being sent to the Tapwino. We'll come back here and you'll see that it is still saving that software. And it's saving it on a tap file called REC-0001. So we need to remember that. Hey, it's complete. It's saved it. We're back in record mode. Now, let's see if we can pull it back. So what I'm going to do now is go back here and let's list. You'll see that it's in there. So we need to new. So we're going to hit new, and that's going to clear the program. We hit list and you'll see it's gone. We hit Shift F1 to kind of clearing up the screen again. And now what we're going to do is we're going to load, and remember I can hit that shift for that first character, and we're going to load RetroCombs, right? That was what we called it. And we can do that. We could also just do, hey, load the very first program on the tape, because that's the only one that's on that tap file, but that can get a little tricky. So we're going to go ahead and do it this way. So now it says press play on tape. Let's go back here. Now what we have to do on here is, remember we're in record mode. We got to change that back to play mode. So let's go back here. We're in play mode. I'm going to hit enter. And now what I want to do is go to that recorded. This is a directory. Recorded is a directory. We're going to go into that directory. Remember that name? rec0000, that's not the one we had, so we'll go down one. There's the one we want. That's the one that we just loaded. We'll go ahead and hit enter. It says it's loading, and you see it's pretty fast. We're already at 10%. Let's see what's happening on the computer side. You'll see it's blanked again, so that means something's happening. That's a good thing. Go back here, we're at 45%, 50%, again, real time. It's 2 lines of code. Look how long it's taking to actually load this software. We'll go back here. It says it found retro combs because that's the name of the software we were looking for, so that's good. It's loading. We're back to moving here at 65, 70%. Now, keeping those fingers crossed, what should happen is we should have our program back right about now. Let's take a look and see if we have it. So we'll do our list command. Again, an L-Shift-I should do that for us. Look at there, it's back, and we can run. And there we go. So we are saving and loading software from our data set, or our Arduino. And that is the next section in our user's guide right here. And let's see if we have everything covered. Okay, it looks like we are good to go. So let's move away from cassettes and move into diskettes by using our Pi 1541. Okay, let's move to diskette drives. And back in the day when I had my Commodore VIC-20, the cassette player, the data set, was the only storage device I had. I didn't get a 1541 until I had my first Commodore 64, and then later I upgraded to a 1581 with my Commodore 128. Oh, I wish I still had those computers. Why, oh why did I ever get rid of them? However, if you were able to afford a floppy disk machine, you were a highfalutin man. I'm telling you, if you went from this to this, it was a big deal for you, because you saw how slow these were. These were significantly faster, still kind of slow by today's standards. Let's not mince words here. These are still not the fastest, and the 1541 wasn't the fastest because it was a serial device rather than a parallel device. Now, what's nice about the Plus 4 is the Plus 4 had its own diskette drive that was a parallel device, so it was faster. Unfortunately, they're very hard to get a hold of. I don't have one, so what I did was I recreated the 1541 with the Pi 1541, which I shared earlier, and we're going to do that. We're going to cover loading and saving software now with a floppy, virtual floppy, using the Pi 1541. So let's go back to the desk. Just as a reminder, this is our Pi 1541. The case is something that I have created and have 3D printed. I'm working on it. It does have a top, but the top isn't fitting exactly the way I want right now, so I'll keep working on that. But I do have these integrated buttons built into the case. As a matter of fact, those are printed into the case when you print the case, so that's kind of cool. I'm going to refine that a little bit, but you'll see everything's working. It says Plus 4. This is a folder that has Plus 4 software on it. Let me move that a little bit closer for you. So there's all kinds of software in there, but we can also use it to create our own directories for our own software. So we're going to go through that together. Just remember though, this is our 1541. Look at the size difference. I think what's also interesting is I was able to build this whole thing for around $50. This would have cost about $300, not this floppy disk obviously, but this would have, the device to put this in, the 1541, would have been about $300 back in the day, because it basically had its own computer inside. I believe it had a MOS chip in there as well that was basically a CPU. Other people have talked about that. Go check that out. Let's go and figure out. The user's manual says the first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure the diskette drive is on. So in our case, it is on. Insert the disk into the drive. I have virtually inserted that. Those diskettes reside on a micro SD card that you can see I have inserted here, and you'll see I have a little port for that in my case right there. These little areas right here for the lights, there are activity lights when they're, and you can see that one here, but when the top is on, you'll be able to see the activity lights through the case as well. We do have a speaker. That speaker is not turned on right now, but it will represent when the 1541 is active, whether it's saving or loading. If you remember your 1541, this was a noisy little device, man. It was all kinds of sounds. Let's go back to the computer, and we need to turn the computer on, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to deviate a little bit from the user's manual because it wants us to go ahead and load something from a diskette drive. And the way we do that is we use a neat command called Deload. This is a unique command with later Commodore basic versions that are specific to the type of device. Remember we typed load for the data set? Well, Deload, which is this, works for Think of it as diskette load. It will default to a specific device number, which is 8. We'll talk about that later as we get going through the user's manual. But if you have more than one floppy disk drive, you can label those 8 or 9 or however many you have. There's different ways to label that. This particular one is 8, but Deload has that built in, so it's only going to look at the first disk drive. So I have that assigned, but I don't know what to load because I don't know what's on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back up. We're going to jump to the end of chapter 3, and the very end of chapter 3 is the directory command. So you can type directory in like this. That will work. Let's go ahead and do that. And you'll see this is the directory of the 1541 that is currently inserted into the Pi 1541. You can also hit F3, and that will also give you the directory command. I believe you can also hit D-I Shift R, and that will give you the directory command. Okay, we've cleared the screen. Now what we're going to do is hit the directory command one more time, and you'll see the contents of the virtual diskette drive in the Pi 1541. And if we scroll up, we can take a look at it. This line right here has the name of the actual diskette. You'll see it is Pi 1541. There's a version name. It's 0.123. That's the Pi 1541 software. This is just the name that would be included when you header the disk. We're going to talk about headering the disk, but think of that like formatting. And then you've got some other character codes after. We'll come back and talk about those. You look at this next line right here. This is the +4, but look over here on the right, you'll see that that is a dir. What does that mean? Well, it means it's a directory. So we are not going to visit that directory from this particular listing. What I want, though, is to load one of these PRG files, because that is actually a menuing software that's included with the Pi 1541. And the one we want for the +4 is the FB16. This is for the C16 and the +4. So what I can do is I can come down here to the bottom and I can type Deload. I can open my quotation marks and I can type FB16 and hit close quotations, and I could hit enter and that will go in there. However, you can also come up here if you don't want to type everything over, and right here you can just kind of overwrite what you see. So instead of the 10, we're going to type Deload. You'll notice it gives me the open quotations, the FB16. Now we could go space, 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 and do all of that. I don't know if you remember what the code was, though, from an earlier chapter to get rid of everything after a cursor. You hit the escape key. Hopefully I get this right. You hit Q, and then you notice it gets rid of everything. So you could just right now hit enter, and it's loading that software. It says it's ready. Now let's hit escape Q again to give us a fresh line. Let's type run and watch what happens. This loads the software. So now we have loaded software from our 1541. Or our Pi 1541 in this case. Now what's really cool about this, I'll just share this with you. What's really neat about the Pi 1541 is this piece of software that comes with it. You can easily just jump in here, and you remember that one area that was a directory? I can hit enter and I can go into that directory and I can look at software that's available for me to load. So that is how you load software from the 1541. Let me go ahead and quit this. Okay, so right now you're saying, okay, I get loading, right? Well, how do we save a program onto that diskette? Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to skip around the manual. We're kind of coming backwards through the manual. We're going to talk about saving programs now, and then finally we're going to talk about headering a disk, because that's the most complicated topic, especially when it relates to me using a Pi 1541. So let's talk about saving programs on diskette. Now we've done it with the data set. Let's do it with the 1541, and we need a program. And because I've not loaded, there's nothing in here. If I hit list, you'll see there's nothing there. So let's go ahead and create our program again. See if I can get it retro. If I do some, you may have remembered in a previous video that I was getting some really weird characters. There is a reason for that, and I just want to share that we're going to be talking about that later in a couple of chapters. But sometimes when you're in quotation mode, it allows you to create special characters, and we're going to talk about that, but not now. But I just did want to come back, kind of errata from one of our previous episodes, and talk about that issue. So it's not an issue, it's not a bug, it's a feature. And I think I said that. I said that's either a bug or a feature. I don't remember. But let's get back to this one. Put a space in there because we always know that works better. Do this and then go to 10. Let's run it, make sure it's working. It is. We'll stop that. Now I want to save that to 1541. So what I'm going to do is, instead of save, what do you think it is? It was deload, so you're right, it's desave. It's pretty easy, right? We got it, okay. And let's call that retro combs. And now we're going to hit enter. And it says saving retro combs ready. Did you see how fast that was? Let's call up a directory and see if it actually did anything. Here's our directory. And if you look, there is our retro combs file on our floppy disk. That was fast. So much faster than a data cassette. So you can imagine, and again, this is supposed to be cycle accurate. The Pi 1541 is supposed to be as fast as it would have been on a 1541, a real one. So let's go ahead and list. It's in there. Let's new it. Let's list again. You'll see nothing there. I'm going to go ahead and then clear the screen, trying to get all these keyboard shortcuts in my muscle memory. And now what we're going to do is we're going to load that particular piece of software called retro combs. Now I could go ahead and type it. We know how to do that. D, Shift L, we'll do retro combs and close that. We'll hit enter. It's searching, it's loading, it's ready. Is that right? Could that possibly be right? And there it is. So see how much faster that is. Again, let me show you one more way you could do it. You could call up the directory. You can scroll up. You can type deload. You can go to the end of that line, right? Hit escape Q to clear that out. Hit enter. That loads it. Let's see if it's in there. It's in there. And run. And there we go. So now we have saved programs and loaded programs from our Pi 1541. Okay, well, I mentioned that we were going to save the most difficult concept for last, and that is the header command, or what you're probably more familiar with now, formatting a disk. And typically when you received a box of diskettes, they were not ready for the computer that you were going to use them for, and a Commodore was not an exception to that rule. We had to header or format this disk before we could use it. Now again, we're using a Pi 1541, so let's go down to the Pi 1541. All right, right now you'll see the Pi 1541 is all set up. The first thing that we need to do though is we need to load a disk image. All right, so I have several of them on here, but I have one specifically for this example that we can use to show how to header or format a disk. So what I'm going to do is use my arrow keys here, and I'm going to come down here to, but got to make sure and get the right one, because if you don't get the right one, you're really going to mess this up. So we're going to use the retro combs disk here. I'm going to click that. It's loading it, and you'll see right now that we get some information. It's D08. That's the device number. We'll talk about that. It's using Jiffy DOS now, and this is just the name of the D64 file. If I were to take out the SD card and put it into a computer, that's what it would show. But let's go ahead and take a look and see what's actually on that 64 image. So now we're going to go back to our computer view here. Let's go ahead and hit F3. It's going to pull up the directory, and you're going to see that we have something on here called retro combs, and there's also a retro combs print program. So we could see what that is. Let's go ahead and deload that and see what's on there. So Q, enter, searching, it's loading. Let's list. Hey, it's our retro combs program. Let's run it, and we see that that's fine. So now what we're going to do is we are going to header that disk or make that a new disk. And so it's going to completely wipe out everything on there. So again, before we proceed, I should put a big caution and warning. Be careful with this command, because you are going to wreck your image on your Pi 1541. This one should be ready to go. Let's hit F3. And there we go. So we're on the right one. So make sure there's nothing on there that you want, because here we go. So I have our command, and what we're going to do is I'm going to type in the command first, and then we'll come through and talk about the pieces of the command. So the first part is header, and that is the command that's +4 specific. If you used a Commodore VIC-20, Commodore 128, I think had the header command. I don't remember, don't quote me on that, but I know the C64 didn't. You had to use this cryptic open command with a bunch of variables afterwards with some strings, and then you had to close it, and it was a mess. Next thing we want to do is we want to give a name for the actual diskette. And that's that piece that's at the very top where it says retro combs in line 0. So that's what we're putting in now. And I'm going to do something, let's call this blank. Let's create a blank disk. So this will be blank when we're done with it. So now we're going to go ahead and close our quotations. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to give it U8. Then we're going to talk about I0, and we're just going to use, this is kind of random, and then we're going to do D0. Let's talk about each of those. We've already talked about the name. U8 is your device number. So if you had another disk drive and that would probably be on device 9, then you would put U9. The I07 is just a unique 3D identifier for that specific disk, and that can be anything you want. They say they should be different, and it's not a problem unless you have two floppies in a dual floppy drive and they both have the same characters. That's the only reason that you would need them to be unique. Other than that, or maybe you're swapping floppies. If you have multiple floppies that you need to load across floppies, you probably need those to be different so it can know which one is in and which one is out. But typically that can be anything you want if it's a single floppy system that you're using. And then finally, the D0 is, it is the first drive on a multi-drive system. So if you had another diskette drive that had multiple diskette ports or floppy ports in there, like 1 and 2, A and B, D0 would be the first one, and then D1 would be the second one. So that's kind of what it is. Now, if this works, I should be able to hit enter, and what's going to happen is it's going to completely wipe out retro comb. So let's give it a shot and see what happens. Okay, the next thing it says, are you sure? And I'm glad it does that because, again, it's gonna erase this. So let's see what happens. Okay, now, right now something is happening because the computer's locked up. Let's go back to our monitor here, and I want you to take a look at the Pi 1541. You'll see that we have a red activity light. It's just on. I really wish it would kind of click. What you would hear right now is, you should hear, if this were a real 1541, you'd hear it clicking through the sectors and headering or formatting those sectors. Because I don't have the sound activated, that may have given me that audio feedback. But for now, it just needs to do its thing. So we're going to let it go. And it's real time, as I said before. It did take a while to header disk. So let's go ahead and just let it complete its process. Okay, while this is finishing up, first of all, I need to do a big shout out to Stephen White. Stephen White was a viewer of a previous video when I assembled the Raspberry Pi, or the Pi 1541 rather, and he said, the question I had is, how do you header a disk with a Pi 1541? Is that possible? And he was the one that gave me the instructions in order to do this. So big shout out to viewer Stephen White. And hey, look, what timing, and now we're done. So let's go ahead and check it out and check out our directory. Pull up directory and you see that now you can compare the top with the bottom. Before it was called retrocombs, now it's blank. Our retrocombs print.program is now gone. If we look on our Pi 1541, what I do want you to note though is that this name did not change, again, because that is the file name of that D64 file on that SD card. So if you wanted that to change, you would actually need to pop the SD card out of here, pop it into a card reader on a computer, and then rename it. I do not know of a way to rename that with the +4. Hey, Stephen White, if you're out there, you may know how to do it, or someone else may know how to do it. You could, if you were to take the Pi 1541, plug in a full-size monitor and a keyboard, I think you can get to it and do it. But again, don't quote me. I just think based on my research, that's what's happening. So that is how we header a disk. Let's go ahead and let's list. You can see that we have our program here that's still in memory. What do you say we try and save that to our new headered disk? So let me just go ahead one more time, check out the directory. There we go. And now we're going to desave. And let's call this retro scroll. So it's different than something else we've done. We will hit close quotations. Now, we should just need to do that. But remember, we don't need that -8 or any of that other business. We hit enter, it's saving. My little light was flashing over here. It's already done. Let's pull up our directory. There it is. Retro scroll is saved. Hey, let's go ahead and list. Let's do a new. Let's list it again. You'll see that that's gone. Let's do a deload. And we know that that is retro scroll. And we'll close that. Remember, I could have scrolled up and just used the line already there. It's just faster at this point. Let's load it. It's searching. It's loading. Let's list it. It's there. Let's run it. Just make sure everything's working. And lo and behold, we have a working +4 system that can load software from a cartridge, from a tape drive or a data set via the Tapwino project, and then also from a 1541, or in our case, a Pi 1541. Okay, let's go ahead and remove a program that's on the diskette. Now, this is not covered in Chapter 3, but if you go to page 101 in your user's guide, you'll find some additional commands on how to use the diskette drive. And I thought Scratch should be thrown in here. I'm not quite sure why it wasn't included in Chapter 3. Along the way, I probably will make some additions and changes. You've already noticed I've kind of shifted around the book in the way that I think it makes more sense. But let's talk about how to remove that program from a diskette. So if we pull up our directory, you notice that we have our retro scroll. I'm not going to get rid of that one, but what I am going to do is I'm going to create a new program, and it's going to be a very simple program, and it's just going to be one line with a rem statement. So we'll do this, type list, and you'll see I have the program. Oh, you see we have a 20 go to 10, which is left over from my other program. So let's go ahead and get 20 out of there, and let's list that again. Now we just have the one line 10 rem, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to desave that, and let's call that our rem program. So remember D Shift L, or D Shift S for desave. We'll do that. We'll do that, saving our rem program to our diskette, and we'll hit F3, and now you see that we have our retro scroll and we have our rem program. You see they're PRG files, so they're both program files. Let's go ahead and get rid of rem. Now again, this is a lot easier on a +4 than it was on a Commodore VIC-20 or 64, because we don't have to do all that open and close business. We have a fun new command called scratch, and it's just going to scratch that program right off of that diskette. So in our case, we're going to get rid of rem. So we'll hit our open quotations, close, and we have scratch rem program. So let's see what happens. Says, are you sure? So I did something right. It's going to do something. Let's hope it's the right thing. So we'll say yes. We'll hit enter. And it says 01 file scratch 0100. So what does that mean? Well, let's go back and look at our directory, and it means that that program is gone. It is gone for good. It's out of there. So that's how you can remove a program from a diskette. Let's check and see if there's a shortcut for scratch. So let's do S Shift C. And let's do REM, hit that and hit enter. And you'll see we have a syntax error. Let's try something else. Let's try SC Shift R and REM and close quotations. So you can see on this one, we have to go 3 characters in. So it's not just the second character, it's the third character. Seems like if it's 4 or less characters, you can use the first letter. If it's more than 4 characters, it needs to be the third letter. But let's make sure it works. It says the file was scratched. So there is your shortcut for the scratch command. And I want to thank you again for watching this video. And remember, Chapter 4 will come out soon. It should be a little faster to get to Chapter 4 than it was to Chapter 3, because I have everything. I have all the hardware now. We can just kind of go into this. And the other thing I want to remind you again is hit subscribe below. Hey, if you like this video, share it. Let people know it's out there. I am trying to build my base of viewers. I'm actually at 833 viewers or subscribers, which is amazing. And if I get to 1,000, that's some magical number for something. I'll figure out what that is, but everybody says you need to get to 1,000. So I think it has something to do with being able to earn a little income from your hobby. And that's really what I'm doing, because if I can do that, then I can bring you more of these videos, and hopefully you think they're good and worthwhile videos. But really excited to do this, and also continue to leave those comments. Those comments are really helping me. As a matter of fact, I couldn't have gotten through this episode without Steven's, and not this Steven, another Steven, Steven White's comments. And you all are sharing some great tips and tricks along the way. Let's make it a community. Let's build it. If you have something that you would like for me to try on the +4, I know the Future Was 8-Bit had the cartridge. I purchased that personally, but if you have something that belongs and is a modern update to the +4, or maybe you have one of these accessories that I've been able to locate, and you'd like for me to highlight that on this channel and really show what the +4 is capable of, just reach out to me on Twitter at Stephen Combs, DM me, and we can talk about how you might be able to send that my way. But again, thank you for watching. I look forward to the next episode, and Retro Combs out.